Welcome back to the Belonging Place, where we talk about the importance of community uh, and communication and belonging. And I'm really excited to have one of my dearest friends on the podcast today. Welcome, Stacie Proctor.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I always start out with simply just asking you to tell us a little bit about you, and you can wherever you want to go on that. There's a lot about you, so yeah,
Sure. Just like with everyone, there are all these different facets.
yeah.
So I think some that I've been leaning in pretty heavily to lately. I'm a wife, married to Andy Proctor for 11 years, and very much in partnership in businesses, in we own multiple homes, in raising our little boy, in just wanting to be change makers in the world. So
I love this.
yeah, that's a big facet. And then as a mom, I have a 2-year-old little boy, Will, who is the sunlight of my life. And William
William
Apollo
Apollo.
Proctor,
We have to
yes.
get the whole name because it's a good name.
It's a very special story in his name. And but yeah, he's just being his mom and watching him grow and being his guide to the universe is like one of the key roles in my whole life I think I'll ever play. And so that's really exciting, keeps me on my toes. I am a business owner, so I'm a founder and CEO of a marketing agency and was recently awarded Utah Business 40 Under 40. It is an entirely female business. I did not mean for it to be that, but we represent woman power. So
Yes.
it's pretty phenomenal. We have an international impact. We host like large scale giveaways and give away things like an Enchanting Castles tour in Ireland or a Dream Nursery makeover. So
And it's called
it's called Gathered.
Okay. And
So
they can find that on Instagram
yep,
and
yep,
all the places, right?
all the places.
And it just so they get it, it's spelled
GATHRD.
yeah. Okay.
Yep, Gathered. And it's about growing good in the world. So businesses who are doing good things, we want to just amplify the impact that they're making and bring those brands together in collaborative partnership efforts because we have bigger impact when we're working together. So that, and then I'm also currently Mrs. Utah American. I was second runner up at the Mrs. American pageant in Las Vegas just recently. And so top 3 in the nation, very, very proud of that. Proud to represent the state of Utah. Proud to be a face of a movement, which is my platform about restoring community and connection. And just to be in a position to serve in big ways on a local level, state level, and even national level.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna stop. That's a lot of
Yeah.
things. So before we move on, I happen to be privy to like the last many years of your life, pre-will, pre all of this. Actually, different business. I've known you since before
Mhm.
this business, so I have a little insight to this. But for people that might be hearing you, Stacie, and all of your arrivals,
Sure.
I'm just gonna ask this general question. You
Yeah.
can answer it however you want, but how do you balance all of that?
Mm. It's funny. My question on the Mrs. American stage was, what does success look like to you?
Yeah.
And you have 15 seconds, right, to answer this question. And I think the words came out of my mouth. I don't believe in balance or something to that effect. And what I mean by that is I can't give equal amounts of attention to everything in my life, and I wouldn't want to because certain things demand more attention, and there are certain seasons and times when it's really important to be giving attention in a particular area. Right now with Will, my little boy, it's so important to me to be there for him at all the crossroads moments of his days, to have quality time, to feel like I really am his guide to the universe. It's not someone else raising him. That said, he does go to like a Montessori play school so that I can have time to work on my business, which is also another big part of my life mission. And my community work as well. So one of the things I really try to practice is just being all in wherever I am. And it does take an immense amount of planning and kind of mapping out and budgeting time and energy. And another really important thing is I can't do it all. So when you're doing huge things in so many different areas of life, you really can't. It's more about being the leader and helping people to rise up into roles that really suit them and that are their zones of genius.
Yeah, and never had I seen this more real than when I went to Las Vegas to see you perform and met your like team. right? Like
Yep.
if you don't know that people have a team behind them, they're glammed up everywhere. And if you go to your Instagram, you're just like beautiful and it's like done really well. And you have a social media person who's helping me. You have a hair person. You have a makeup person, which by the way, I don't know their names, but they are amazing. And I met them and love them.
Thank you.
I took pictures with them because I thought these guys, but I think it's important. It's important for people to know, right? That yes, you are beautiful and somebody made your dress. Your beautiful,
Yes,
beautiful dress.
designed.
Yes. And somebody did your hair and somebody somebody took care of Will while you and Andy were gussied up and walked across the stage, right? There were just lots of people and some of those were professional people and some of those were just friends and family and moms and grandmas that were putting arms around and helping you to do the thing, right? I love that all in like wherever you are. It's one of the things that probably attracted me the most to you. If we were to tip all of that arrival upside down and we were to look at like the roots and like, you know, we take all the glam away, what's left?
A soul searcher. So about 10 years ago, you know this, but for anyone who hasn't heard this story before, my whole universe was just flipped upside down. And the framework that I'd based my identity on and kind of my entire life trajectory on, my life story on, really just kind of crumbled beneath me. And I remember having this moment. If you've ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, it really portrays what it's like to experience an episode of psychosis, which is something that I experienced and was hospitalized for, kind of entering into a state of delusion. And for me, it was spiritually based. And so when I came out of that, I felt so much confusion and a really big lack of trust in my own sense of knowing and even in many of the beliefs that I had based my entire life and decisions on. And so coming out of that, it was almost like it was that I had to create an entirely new framework to exist in and to operate within. And I can remember the feeling just kind of looking out the window. I was living in Huntington Beach at the time, looking out the window, just feeling like, is any of this even real? It was kind of, you know, just so.
I remember the first time you said that to me and it like reverberated through my soul.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's so.
And if people,
hard.
you know, if you can't relate to that, I'm so happy that you can't relate to that. And if you can, it's just where you don't know where you fit in time and space. If you even like, it's just this massive existential,
Anchorless, right?
Yeah,
Like,
anchorless. That's a great word. And I remember I couldn't find ground to touch my feet on. And so in many ways, I just kept doing the things that I had always done, but it felt really meaningless and kind of hollow. And I just was waiting and hoping kind of to touch ground somewhere.
And just to give some context, you're how long married?
Just over a year before, yeah.
So this is Andy's and yours second marriage to each other. Just some context to the like realness of who you guys are, right? And you're barely over a year, and this happens.
Yes, and even a little bit more context too. I had left a really unhealthy marriage and didn't think that I would get married. Didn't know if I would ever be in that situation or type of relationship again, and very much felt divinely guided to Andy. And so when we came together, it was just so clear. Like our story, that's a whole story for another day.
We might have you guys both back on and talk about that story.
It's a magical story.
Yeah.
And to feel God so close to me and just holding my hand and guiding me in my life, it was so comforting. And I just felt at peace. Like anything that happens to me, as long as I can just have God with me, I know I can get through anything. And so
yank.
Yeah. Well, so Andy and I started out with we went on this really cool honeymoon trip that was over a month long, and we went to different places in Europe and the Middle East.
You guys are so intentional from the minute you like joined, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And we came home, we started a business. It was a online supplements business, and it was phenomenally successful. And it just felt like everything I've ever dreamed of is coming true.
yeah,
And then
enter.
rug gets pulled out. And there were a series of events. I think part of it was genetics, part of it was circumstantial. My uncle passed away by suicide, which really impacted me deeply. I had just had a major surgery, and I think the timing of things was just the perfect storm to where I became severely depressed, and I just could not pull myself out of it. And I look back at it now, and I feel like my brain was really trying to rescue me from just floundering, and plucked me out and put me in an alternate reality until we could figure this out.
Safety, right? Our bodies, our minds, our spirits, they do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here I was just in this completely anchorless place and still going to church, which has been a big part of my life, and still.
But it's got to be confusing and scary and all kinds of. I imagine it felt and looked different from that frame.
It did. Because I was a teacher for youth, and for me it was really important to be authentic. I never wanted to say that I believed something I didn't,
Right.
or be inauthentic with the girls and that I was mentoring. And so just navigating that made it was so much mental gymnastics every single week to try to find principles and things that I did believe in that I could share in the context of religion without saying things that I didn't believe. And I remember, though, I learned how to do family history work because it was something that we were going to be teaching. And I opened up this kind of digital page where it showed my family tree. And on my dad's side, it just went back for generations. My grandparents had done a lot of work. On my mom's side, she'd been adopted, and so there were some things with her adopted line. But you can kind of switch back and forth between biological and adopted. And I switched over to her biological side, and it just stopped. And it was like there was nothing there, and it was just this big empty space. And I remember feeling like I want to look at this and I want to talk with her about this. And so I did, and she'd been kind of not totally closed off, but just really hesitant to talk about some of the things before. And so I brought up this idea of like, hey, I'd like to get more information and fill in our family tree. And she was really open to it. It ended up being really beautiful and healing for her and for me. And what it did was it gave me an anchor in that something I could not dispute for me. Right. I could not dispute that I existed because she existed because
that is an
people
anchor.
before her came. And this bloodline, specifically this matriarchal bloodline, really gave me a sense of place in the world and a belonging place and a knowing of who I was and where I fit.
I love that.
So it did shift for me. And suddenly, because of all of these connections, I found myself connected into this human family. And when I look at my whole experience, I've had moments where genuinely I've asked, why would God let me have this experience where I would come to not even know if God was real?
Right.
Like, isn't that so contradictory? I've thought, if some of my foundational beliefs were incorrect and limiting, I could see where we would need to go in and excavate, subterranean level.
From the root, right?
Mm-hmm, from the root. And I can see now where breaking down some of these notions that I'd had, I did come to a more expansive place where there really is this sense of human family connection, this deep love and respect for different people, different beliefs, all on their journey. And who am I to say who's right or wrong?
Yeah, I want to ask you a question on that.
Yeah.
So when I entered your world, you were so gracious and so vulnerable. I mean, from the minute that we became friends, I feel like I knew things about you and your life that I didn't know really about most of my friends or people. You were just so willing, Stacy, to like be, I don't know. There's a better word than vulnerable, but I can't think of it. It's just like even deeper. And one of the things that I loved watching, still, I would say still, but there was a few years in there when there was just, I don't really like the word like faith crisis, but I like to say faith questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And at some of that points of time, you're very open about even what you hung on your walls in your house and what you talked about and what you and for me watching you, I have my own thoughts about that, but I want to ask you. So for a lot of people, these pain points or this, I've talked about this before, but this just feeling pain averse, right? And I can't, it's like an all or nothing. I'm either all in or I'm all out. This is what a lot of people, and I don't blame this for people. This is not a shaming comment, but you weren't doing all in and all out. You were doing this gray, which I'm very attracted to because as a therapist, I live a lot in the gray, right? And and I want to ask you about that. Like, how do you feel like you could do that? I saw that you did it so well. Maybe you didn't feel like you were doing it well, but from the outside, it was like a pretty graceful mess, if you want to call it that. Maybe I don't want to call your life a mess.
You
but
can call it a mess. And you can call it a
I,
crisis.
I don't want to call it anything, but I think the question I want to ask you is, as the person who is living in it that didn't seem to tip all or either way, what do you think contributed to your ability to do that?
It was a reorientation of my center point. Like, what is my North Star? And really, before it had been kind of externalized into leaders of the church, and even just other people outside of myself who might know better than me. And after going through just, such a warp in perception and reality, I came back to this place where there was one particular day I was home from church. I stayed home. It was the first time I'd ever just not gone. And I was like, okay, is this where everything starts to fall apart? And it was one of the best decisions that I could have made for myself at that time. I stayed home and I watched this documentary called Wisdom from the Ancient World. And why it was so valuable and important to me was because it put me in a position where I was able to listen with a little bit more objectivity and more ownership to say, this resonates with me. I'm going to put it here. This doesn't resonate with me. I'm going to just set it here. And that's something I had never before allowed myself or felt like I could do.
Yeah.
And so it was strengthening. It was actually a dinner at your house where I met a friend who shared, he's a gay member of the church, and shared that for him, navigating this really kind of unknown, territory, he's had to notice and go towards that which feels like light. And he's like, we all know what that is, and we know what that feels like. And it does take a tremendous amount of trust to just say, okay, like, I'm taking ownership of my life. I could be right. I could be wrong. But at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to live this life. And I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of my choices, good and bad. And so I'm going to do my best to go towards that which feels like light, trusting that it will all make sense and everything will work out, in the end. And so again, kind of placing that compass back inside of me has helped me to be able to stand in a space and not fully leave it or fully take it on, and same in another space. And it's been very challenging. Even if it's looked graceful, it's been very messy internally. And I would say even more so in certain social circles where that kind of exploration is not understood or even feared. And so it's been, again, just trusting, exercising trust in myself and trying to be respectful and kind with others. But yeah, just coming back to, in this place, these are things that I believe, these are things I don't. And so I'm going to live according to these values, preferences, and beliefs. And that's all that I can do.
Yeah. I want to extend this outside of spirituality because in a similar vein, and thank you for being so willing to be so honest. I've also seen that in your marriage. So yes, you guys look like you, I think you could look like you have this picture perfect marriage. You even have a picture every year of your anniversary, a literal picture that's like an inception of every year that you get married, right? And if you were to take a camera and go into your home, you've got beautiful things and you've got a beautiful son. And I'm not saying you don't have a beautiful marriage, but also as a person who has been living alongside you and loving it, that hasn't been perfect. And part of that, I think, is that you both are so passionate, smart individuals that are goal oriented and forward focusing, and you're a super aligned, and you look at the world differently, and you maybe are hooked in spiritually at different times than the other person, and I don't want to describe it more. I also want to ask you that question. What has helped you the most to have the marriage that you have?
It's a different quality to a relationship, specifically marriage, but really any relationship, when you genuinely have an appreciation for differences in perspectives, differences in strengths. Those are the things that are the most maddening too when you're trying to make decisions. I remember trying to convince Andy to buy our first house, and he just thought it was the worst financial decision ever. It would just be bondage. We would be
This is funny. This is ironic.
Right? Ironic. We just bought our third house, and he led the charge on that. But yeah, it was like pulling teeth. And it was this dance that we've had to figure out very similarly with our little boy Will, because, we both had concerns about my health and my mental health, being able to get pregnant through pregnancy, postpartum, all the things. And so it took us 8 years from the time that I was hospitalized from the breakdown to when we actually had Will.
Yeah.
And the last 2 years of that was, again, kind of a teeth pulling experience, not because he didn't deep down want that, but because the way,
what is that going to look like?
and the risks and all of those things. And so it can be so challenging to be in a relationship with someone who has their own values, preferences, and beliefs,
or
right?
anxieties, or
Yep. And just the way that they would get from point A to B would look very differently than the way that you would, even if you have those shared goals. So it really has been a dance where we've come to trust each other more. We've learned where do our strengths come into play for the betterment of us in progressing together and even individually. And we still step on each other's toes plenty of times. But even last night, we were sitting down, making some big changes. I'm almost to the point where my business is completely hired out, and I'm entering a new phase of life as an absentee business owner, and which is like another new identity crisis for me. If I'm not founder and CEO, who am I? And we just purchased this third house, and we've hit all these kind of arrival points. And we were just stepping back for a minute and feeling we've been in this kind of season of pushing, and it's been a little bit messy, and we're a little bit bruised right now. We've been climbing to the tops of the mountain, and just taking a moment just to even say, I love you. I'm so grateful that we're partners. We can do so much more together than either of us could have done alone. Like, thank you.
Yeah. And I've watched that. And the magic of it for me hasn't been the buying of the house, or even having the baby, or even the 30 under, or what is it?
40 under 40.
40 under 40 awards. Though I love that you have all that, all the things. I want you to have all the things. But the things have never been the thing that I've loved about you. It's always been the journey and the process of figuring it out in between. It's always been the authentic, like, really show up. It's been the tears in the car. We call it the nest, but you have this couch that we can just sit and you can play with my hair. I can cry. You can cry. It's my favorite thing, is that like yes, you do good things, Stacy, but it's who you are. It's like who you are. It's that you don't shy away from talking about mental health. It's that you are willing to say, like, yes, there's good things and we can go towards good things, but who we are and how people feel around us is really what matters the most, right? And on that note, I want to talk a little bit about, I want to dive in a little bit about Mrs. Utah American. Can you, if there is somebody that's listening, they don't have a clue
Hmm.
about this process, could you give us a little like truncated, summarized version of like what is it and what is it about?
Sure. So pageantry, like historically, traditionally, it started as a beauty pageant, just women who you kind of put them side by side, and someone is chosen as the most beautiful or the most gracious kind of female representative. I would say that's the shallowest part of pageantry.
Okay.
And I don't even personally believe in comparing women's beauty. I think that's just a
Or their
complete
bodies, right? Yeah.
right. That's just a ludicrous notion. So what it has been for me is it's a stage performance, and a little bit of it's off stage. You have an interview. So in this particular system, 50% of your total score, it's kind of a sport in a way, but 50% of your score is based on a private interview that you have with a panel of judges. And then part of it is on stage. So you wear an evening gown, you wear a swimsuit. There's kind of an opening number that's not scored, but it's just kind of part of it. There's a state costume that's also not scored, but
My
just
favorite
kind
part.
of part of it. It's a very fun
Well,
part.
I should say my favorite. One of my favorite parts.
It's and then depending on how far you go, you get to answer an onstage question. So there's a lot with fitness, beauty, poise, confidence. Every woman who participates in this particular system has a platform or a cause that they're helping to champion.
I'm going to pause you right there for
Yeah.
a second. Because before you talk more about the thing,
Mm-hmm.
is part of the competition, you have to figure out your platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to step back and,
Yeah.
and talk to you about like, how did you figure that out? In the world of all the choices of things, especially we've talked about a lot of things you're
Yeah.
passionate about. Like what was that process for you to figure out your platform?
There was a lot of back and forth because there were so many things that I wanted to talk about and had experience with and felt like I could add some value. At the end of the day, I felt deeply inspired by one of my ancestral stories, and it just felt like the thing that I was called to say at this moment.
Yeah.
And the story is that my great-great-grandma Maria came from a really small village on the border of Hungary and Austria. She ended up coming to the United States. Um, and but when she lived there, we'd had generations living there before. And so there was a time of war. I'm kind of botching the story, so we'll clean it up a little bit. But she lived in a small village on the border of Hungary and Austria. And during a time of war, this village was situated literally on the dividing line. There's a river that ran through the village, and on one side was a tall tower with armed guards, and then there was massive barbed wire fences, and on the other side, more guards with guns pointing at each other. And so this village was right in the thick of the war and the battle. And a miracle happened. These people looked on both sides of the dividing line and they said, these are our family, friends, and neighbors. And these are our family, friends, and neighbors. And so they said, we are a village without borders, meaning anyone from any side can come here, have safety, have food, shelter. They can have a belonging place.
Yeah, you're all a part of us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
a mini Switzerland. And that story has been so powerful to me. I was there in the village walking through these rows of grapes. It's a vineyard area, which is great because I live in vineyard now. And I just felt this deep appreciation and reverence and awe for the hearts and the decisions of the people at that time and the courage that they had to create that. And because many people did come and they found refuge and safety there in that village. And it's still a part of the village's identity. But as I was walking through, I had just been there talking with people, and I knew they hadn't had a baby they had one baby born in the last 15 years, and it was what they call a dying village, just in terms of many of the young people were moving away to the city, older generations were passing on, and they just didn't have a lot of births. And I could not imagine this place not existing and this story and these people. And I was kind of desperately like pleading, like, what can I do? What can I do to help? Is there anything I can do? And my initial thought was like, okay, ancestral tourism or some kind of business, facet. But one of the things that I found is that the story, regardless of, things change, and I don't know the ultimate destiny, right, of this little village, and I can do my part, but also the story lives inside of me. Yeah. This heritage lives inside of me.
Generationally, right?
And even sharing this story. And now a huge foundational piece of our home and family culture is we are a safe space. We're a home without borders in terms of it does not matter what, religious beliefs, political beliefs, race, yeah. Sexual orientation, any of that. For the people in our lives and who come into our home, like, it is all are welcome.
Yeah, it's felt. Yeah, so this led to you, like, when you were making decisions, because we had some conversations before when you were, and of course I'm passionate about belonging places and connection, and we were bouncing ideas off, and ultimately you decided on what for your platform.
So it's called It Takes a Village.
Okay.
And it's all about restoring community and connection, or in other words, bridging the divide, because there are so many divides right now. And many of them that we've kind of inherited or come into, from a built environment standpoint to the way that we've been kind of using technology that actually that doesn't help us to connect.
It creates
barriers, yeah. To kind of the political environment, even businesses operating very much in kind of an isolated mentality and a very self-serving mentality, and becoming disconnected from the environments that they're pulling from, or the communities that they serve, the people working there within it. There's just been this increasing amount of disconnection, and it's felt massive, but I've also felt like, okay, this is what I'm called to talk about and what I actually am good at and can help with.
Yeah.
So this part of restoring community and connection through collaboration is all about bringing together different ideas and different perspectives and strengths and skill sets into any given situation, whether it's in a city council or a city, which I'm doing a lot of work within my own city right now, and I can talk about that.
I want to come back to that.
Yeah.
I want to jump us back. So you picked a platform, and you're doing behind the scenes. And one of my favorite things about behind the scenes was you were very confident that you were going to win. And I love this. This is no surprise. I come from a positive psychology background and a strength-based, solution-focused. Everything like that I believe is, think it, dream it, do it, make it. Like, it's more than just like wanting it. And so you got to the competition, and what happened?
I felt God with me. And so it was more than just, I'm going to psych myself out and, just say it 100 times so that I believe it. I genuinely felt like, Stacy, you are exactly where you need to be. Just show up, just say the words that come to you. You're prepared. And more than just the last few months of preparation, you've been prepared your whole life for this.
Yeah.
And this is what our country needs right now. This is what the world needs right now. They need a voice of hope, and they need a voice of peace, and peace through collaboration.
And why not me?
Right. And so I believed that. And it's not that I look at myself and I think, oh, I'm the most beautiful or I'm the most perfect, because my honest opinion was, no, the person who won was more beautiful than me. But I felt like if I'm called to this, nothing can keep me from it, like nothing. And I felt it. And there were all these things along the way.
You have a phrase. I want to go back.
Yeah.
You have an actual phrase, which is
a crown or something better.
I just love that you have a catchphrase. All great people have catchphrases, but for me, I this is just the essence of you. It's
Right.
just like, I'm going to get to that place. And if that's not my right time or place and it's someone
Mm-hmm.
else's time, there's something else for
Mm-hmm.
me is just so, it's such a, what, like, like the opposite of the fixed. It's such a growth,
Right.
Carol Dweck,
Yeah.
growth mindset, fixed mindset. It's such a growth mindset that says like, okay, if this is my time, great. If this is not my time.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there's this like, but it is my time. Like you had done the work.
Yeah.
You really had done the work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I was ready. And a crown or something better too is not in any way to diminish the crown, saying
Right.
like, well, if I don't get it, then I'm better than that. That's not what it's about.
Right.
It's saying that I trust that in the big scheme of things, that if I'm given this opportunity, it's because it's meant for me. If I'm prepared and I show up, whatever is meant for me will find
And it
me.
will conspire for your good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if not, it's because there's a bigger, play at work, and I'm kind of stepping into a different role that's meant for me and where I can have the greatest impact and the greatest contribution. And I believe the greatest joy as well, ultimately, even if there's some disappointment along the way.
Yes. And here's the interesting thing. As a person on the outside of that, I also like that because selfishly, everybody who loves you is going to have to share you for the year or more, right? With a lot of people and things. So like I also like that because if you weren't the queen or crowned, then I just still got you. Like Stacy, who's still doing good everywhere you go. So it's just a generative like way. I wish more people saw their life that way, the job, the thing, the relationship more just like as a generative way to say, I'm worthy inherently.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever I am, I can be all in wherever I'm in. Where can I do the greatest good?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So you're on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little bit confusing to some people, but there's two competitions going on at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep. So it's like a tree with different branches. Like if you think about the military has the Army, the Navy, like Marines, just different branches. So within pageantry, there are a lot of different organizations. Within the Mrs. America organization, there are 3 branches on the tree. So it's the Miss for America Strong, which is unmarried, has its own kind of qualifications. There's the Mrs. American and the Mrs. America. And so they're just different pathways. So I'm on the Mrs. American stage. And as Mrs. Utah American, going to compete for that title. And if I win, I get to go on to Mrs. World. And for me, I'm looking at this pageant as a vehicle for personal development and growth, but especially for a platform to take my message out into the world and to have this title that I get invited to come to podcasts. I get invited on TV sets and I get to speak about this thing that's important and people will rally. And it truly has opened doors in that regard. But I'm there and even when I'm backstage, they take me into a soundproof booth while they're asking the other top 2 their onstage question. And then I'm taken out and I just can still feel God with me. And so when it comes down to they're calling, okay, and our second runner-up and our first runner-up and the winner, when they called my name, I was surprised because I had felt like so guided and everyone around me had felt it too. It wasn't just me.
That's me.
And I appreciate that. But even strangers, there were people who I was surprised
Yeah.
came up to me afterwards and said, I felt this too. And it was, some of them didn't know what to do with it. And I knew though, with where I was positioned, that it's not that, if I had just done a little bit better, it would have been mine. It was, no, this wasn't meant for me. Not in that way, not in the way that I had pictured it in my mind.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not true. And just kind of being open, like, okay. So I wonder what's next and trusting something better is coming for me. And I genuinely felt at peace. There were so many things that I experienced during that week that I was just like, I wish I could bring this home. Not only the hair and makeup every single day, like somebody else do it for me, but also this closeness and this guidance. And because it's not something that I experienced that intensely on a day-to-day basis, but I really felt it. And so coming home from that, I've had these moments since where I've just been open and, a big part of it has been surrender to the unknown. You don't get to know. You don't get to see around the corner yet. Be at peace. You just get to keep trusting, and that's an action and a choice is to trust. But also, I have had these thoughts come up to me of, wow, if I had one, I wouldn't be doing XYZ. And I can see how that is such a gift and a blessing in my life for me, for other people, long-term things. And so it feels like a very generous thing that I didn't get the title in the way that I thought, in the time that I thought. The other thing that's been really key to me is a deep knowing of, if real change is going to happen, it's going to start on a grassroots level and within my own backyard, within my own home, and within my own heart. And so even in terms of the good I hoped to do within our country that has felt very divided around this election especially, and just feeling like, if not now, when? Now is the moment. Realizing that the changes that we want, if they're to be really transformative and really sustainable, they need to come from the people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is
By the people, for the people.
It's democracy. It's true democracy.
Yeah.
And not waiting and thinking that someone at the very top can either topple it or can save it. That's just not the case.
Yeah.
And so even for me to say, okay, if I'm not up here at this top with this title of Mrs. American or Mrs. World,
I can be in the trenches.
I can absolutely be in the trenches. And yes, what I'm doing absolutely makes a difference.
Yeah. So just as a recap for some people, you in Utah won Mrs. American, and then you went to Vegas and you were what was the...
So I won the title of Mrs. Utah American in March. And
Okay.
then I went to Las Vegas in August and I was second runner-up.
Which is still like
Mrs. American.
amazing. Yeah, yeah. Just so you guys know. So you're our being, this podcast is in Utah. So you are our Mrs.
I am.
Utah American. And you are currently actively with your platform doing some really awesome things, two of which I would love for you to check in on because they happen to be two of my favorite things that you're doing. So one of those is I hear you're building a bridge.
Yes.
Stacy? Could you tell us about, well, first of all, I want to say that Stacy lives in Vineyard, and Vineyard, the city in and of itself, has its own theme or its own
its motto
is
stay connected.
So
which
could
is
be in a better place.
I know. No, truly, Andy and I felt very drawn to and called to this place, which again, I'm sharing all these stories where I feel very drawn or led or called. Those are like the little sprinklings of magic, not kind of the whole. And so when those moments happen, I'm paying attention and I'm so grateful.
Yes.
Yep. And so we very much felt like we were led to Vineyard and
to stay.
Because
you were led there, but there was like, we could buy a house here and we could buy, I remember that feeling of being like, we're going to stay here. Yeah.
And just put in some roots.
Yeah.
So within the city, it's a gorgeous city. It's built for connection. It has beautiful parks, walkability. We're situated, with the lake on one side, the mountains on the other, and it's just kind of picturesque. But it also has gone through a lot of growing pains and has some kind of underlying divisions that can be felt because we were recently the fastest growing city in the fastest growing state in the nation.
At the seams, yes.
And with that, an influx of ideas and needs and agendas. And so
commerce and just so many things.
So many things. And one of the things that happened with this rapid growth is that the railroad line runs right through the city and cuts off part of the community from the rest of the community. And because it was growing so rapidly, just certain measures weren't taken to kind of prevent that or remediate that at the time. And so it's been, now that we've had this portion of our community, largely lower income homes, many single parent homes, 10% of which do not have cars or transportation. The kids don't have access to come to after school programs, sporting events, community events. And so they're bused to and from school, but they don't have support beyond that. And they have to make this long, not safe, walk up one way or another way with traffic and go through winding routes to get to where they need to go. It's not feasible for them to be...
Too many barriers.
No, too many barriers. And so these kids are without community. And one of the reasons I feel so deeply about we need to stay connected, literally creating greater mobility within our community for people who do not have access, is I grew up all over the United States. I moved on average every few months, and we had very little money. And in many cases, we were on welfare or we were relying on the kindness of strangers and people. And so I can look at every place that I lived, and I was so extremely fortunate that there was always a community, whether it was through church, school, any program that I was able to get into at any point in time. I always had people. And I feel like I was raised by community. And so I think about these kids right now and just the isolation, the disconnection that they have, and the families too. These parents who are trying to do it alone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm married and I have resources and it's hard.
Yeah.
And you need a village.
Yeah.
And so this bridge, I was not the first person to come up with this idea, come to find out, but I did have a friend who's working with the Utah Department of Transportation, was aware of a lot of funding that was available for projects that promoted social connection. And he asked, hey, do you have anything that you're aware of as I think I was Mrs. Vineyard at the time, about to compete at Mrs. Utah. Do you have anything that this money could be used for? And I said, yes, we need a bridge. Yeah. And so started kind of doing some research, making some connection points, found out there had been some discussion about it, but really no movement for a variety of reasons. One of which it's extremely difficult to get many parties with competing agendas to come together on this kind of project. Yeah. And there were so many parties and so many agendas. And so it kind of just stalled out.
Yeah.
So that's where I said, okay, I don't have, I have the title of Mrs. Vineyard and I have the title of Stacie Proctor.
Yeah.
And this is important to me. And this matters, not just to me, but this kind of a thing will impact generations.
Yeah.
Our built environment, once it's there, it's probably going to be there for at least the next 100 years.
Yeah.
So thinking about all of the kids.
Generational change. Yeah.
Yeah. And not just what are they missing out on, but what are we missing out on truly? What are we missing out on by not having these people in our lives and in our communities? So with that, it's been rallying the forces, and from a grassroots level, I've done a series of things within the community to restore community and connection, one of which being working on this bridge.
Yeah. The second, thank you. And I'm excited about this. And I mean, one of the podcasts that my producer also works with, they literally are talking about how to be bridge builders, like people and relationships. Yeah. Obviously, I feel like connection and belonging is one of my like thematic things in life. It's one of the things that brought me and you together, right? It's just a desire to feel seen and heard and to be understood. And I love this literal idea of like building an actual bridge. Speaking of building bridges, another organization that you have had the privilege to be connected with, I hope I get this right. I think it's called Braver Angels.
You got it. Yeah.
And I would love you to tell us, first of all, I think there's a lot of people that don't even know who, unfortunately, I am not one of those because I learned from you, but I think there's a lot of people that don't know about Braver Angels. Can you tell us a little bit about them and like how you got involved and some of the cool things you've been able to do with them?
Yeah. So it was actually at a religious conference, a Faith Matters conference that I heard.
Shout out to Faith Matters.
Faith Matters. I heard Governor Cox speak about this organization called Braver Angels and how they were helping to bridge divides in the political spectrum. I have historically stayed away from politics because of conflict, right? And it's just felt really nasty. And so in many ways, I was at a distance or I just was absent kind of from the political sphere and not engaged. And when I heard about this organization, I had been voting, I had been doing some things, but I still was not heavily into conversations. But it caught my attention because I said, okay, I love this idea that we can come together and learn more from each other and create something better together, and that our differences really do help us to come to stronger and better solutions. I was like, that rings a bell for me.
Yeah.
So I dug into the organization a bit more, did some research, got connected to learn more, and ended up, long story short, I've done a number of projects with Braver Angels, including some collaborative discourse dinners and workshops within my local city. For the state of Utah, we did a film screening on The Basement Talks. It's a documentary about women who had it was in a time in an area of violence over differences in opinions on the topic of abortion, and women who came together and said, we need to we need to create different rhetoric around this because it's jeopardizing our safety of our community. And so we had this film screening, we had a debate and a dinner. Everything I'm involved with basically has food. Let's just say that.
And it should.
And it just helps, right? But then also Braver Angels invited me to their national convention that was held in the summer in Kenosha. And I was invited to be the voice of hope, part of a production where we were sharing true stories of people all over the country who are building bridges, literally, figuratively, in all these different spheres across education and politics, within religion, within just communities, and got to be the one to help kind of present and share many of these stories. And even just barely on election night, I spent election night with my National Braver Angels family, where again, we focused on just stories of hope, and that regardless of whatever the outcome was going to be, that we had a love for each other and a respect and a responsibility as people within a democracy to continue forward and to continue working together and to just lean into our differences.
Yeah, and not only lean in, but like what brings us together and our commonality is stronger than what it like divides us, right? And that we can move forward in that. I was waiting on bated breath as one of your friends and fans as you were posting from that. So I just want to shout out to everybody that on Stacy's social media, you can go back and you can see her talking about Braver Angels, and you can, and some of the stuff she's doing. You can also go, we'll also post stuff for Braver Angels so that people can be connected to them. But these two examples are just two of many, Stacy, of the ways that you are utilizing your platform for good and helping connect people. This is a big question, but I'm going to ask you, so far with this platform, what are some of the things that you have learned, and maybe things that have surprised you that maybe you didn't think that you would pick up along the way?
I think this might be the case with anything that you study deeply. It's pretty easy to start to see the ideal and where you are a little more starkly. So it's been interesting that I've become more aware of my own isolation in certain ways, or my own loneliness in certain ways, and lack of connection in my own life in certain key relationships or in ways. And so it's kind of like, well, now what do you get to do with that? And so part of it is being this voice and helping create real change on a bigger level. But a huge part of the work is just in my own life and in my own little world. How do I make those changes so that, how do I create an anchor place so that Will, my little boy, and, generations to come have something to hold to? How do I bridge divides between, maybe distant family members and myself? How do I heal broken relationships? How do I engage more peacefully and respectfully within political sphere? So yeah, there's been a lot of personal growth that's maybe been surprising. I think in many cases, people assume that in a leadership role, it's because you have it all figured out. And Andy right now is in a PhD program, and he talks about with a PhD, you kind of get to the edge of this bubble of knowledge and you maybe make a little dent in it. But if anything, you just realize how much we don't know.
That's what most things that you dive into, right? Like the more you learn, the more you're like, oh.
So as a leader, it's not that you know everything. It's just that you're willing to come forward and share what it is you have found, and be willing to be vulnerable to say, and we need to do more.
Yeah, and like they talk about in the V, right? If you're in the front of the V, you also take the hits. You also like are sort of forging like a path. You're permission giving for other people to jump on that train that you're. It's very like synergistic. It's very generative, I feel like, to be in the wake of what you're doing personally and also as a part of your platform. I just want to say thank you and I appreciate, like, thank you as a friend, but also thank you as like somebody in Utah and somebody in the United States who's just like feels very strongly that what we need is ways to connect, ways to reach across the table and see what we have in common, and also a little bit of an ability to not necessarily have to be right, like, but and not necessarily have to give up things that we love, right? But you
Right.
talked earlier about this, putting some things, sitting next to them. Sometimes people like to say put it on the shelf. I almost like to say I sit it next to me, right? And I do what I can, and the things that I don't understand I can put next to me. I see them, I notice them, but they don't have to make me disconnect from other people. It's this open ability, it's expansive, I think you said, ability to have my own anchors and my own belief system, so that I'm not anchorless like we talked about earlier, but also so that I'm open to people coming in and out of my lives. I think we have the opportunity to really create safe, belonging places when we do this kind of a thing. I want to ask future Stacy a question. So, as somebody who has watched you and Andy, but you sort of build goals and dreams, and they're very smart goals, right? You're like, this is how we're going to do it, and by this timeline. And even your dating, I talked about this when we interviewed Andy, but one of my favorite things in meeting you guys was there was this box, and there was all these dating ideas and how to keep your marriage and how alive, and it's exciting. So as a planner person who's just like, I'm going to go after my dreams, if you look down the line 10 to 15 years, and as perspective, that's Will as a teenager. And what kinds of things do you feel like you need to do today or in the next year or so? What kinds of seeds do you feel like you need to plant in order to take advantage of those trees 10 to 15 years down the line?
This has been on my mind a lot lately, because I'm entering to this new chapter where I will have more space and more means, and it's this very privileged situation to say, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
And it's overwhelming. And what I've been feeling guided towards is the word nurture. And so I'm looking at all these little things in my own life, little interests that I have that I can nurture in little ways. So I love ballet. I used to dance somewhat. I was never like a ballerina, but it's always been an interest of mine. There's a local community adult beginning ballet class that runs for like 6 to 8 weeks that I can go to towards the beginning of next year. I want to take piano lessons so I can strengthen my ability to sight read, and it's just like a weekly lesson. So these little things where it's just nurturing talents or interests, and not needing them to bloom faster than they do naturally, right? And
line upon line, right?
And not needing to monetize them all or any of them. And then looking at relationships. So my relationship with Will, I think, is maybe the most obvious of how do I nurture this relationship? How do I really listen to who he is and what he wants, even at 2.5 years old? And how can I kind of
foster,
and just cultivate that deep sense of trust and love in our relationship, and give him support as he's exploring and expressing and growing, and within my marriage. And so for me, that is this place of what's next. And as I look ahead, I really can't see. It's almost like I've got kind of a filter, and the lesson I'm learning is, don't be so focused here. I want you to focus here on these little things, and trust that, again, the right opportunities will find you when it's time. The things that are meant for you will not be kept from you. And you'll be ready if you're willing and if you're prepared. Like, you won't miss what's meant for you.
It's so interesting as you say these words. There's a favorite hymn of mine. It's called "Lead Kindly Light," but it's just like one step enough, just like one foot in front of the other, and putting good into the world. And I have no doubt that you'll continue to do that and be all in wherever you are. And I'm excited to see what the future looks like for you. Before we end, is there anything else that you feel in your heart to talk about when it comes to, actually, before I ask my last question, I wanted you to hit on this one last thing. It was very noticeable and very intentional of you throughout your whole platform. I'm sure you'll continue to do this, to shine a light on sisterhood and the belonging place of the women that you've come into contact with. I wonder if you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah. Whether it's in a sporting environment or pageantry or online, it is really challenging to navigate a space of comparison,
Yeah.
especially when it's built in to the framework of whatever it is that you're participating in. But I found that I grow the most and I like who I am the most when I am in a space of appreciation, a space of being inspired by other women's accomplishments, when I'm in a space of curiosity. Okay, they're amazing at this thing and I value that. What can I learn from them, rather than feeling like, oh no, I need to make myself look a little bit better.
Comparison is the thief of joy, right?
It is. It's also the thief of great relationships and friendships. And so I have developed deep, genuine sisterhood with we like both the sister queens, the other two women who have titles, one of whom I was directly competing against on a state level. But even before we won, we became deeply connected. And then all the women within this pageant community. And it's been so cool to feel it and see it and even hear from the outside, from directors on both a state and national level. I've heard the same thing of, we've never seen a group of women like this. And I know it's not just me, because it can't be. But I know that me making that an intention and deliberately showing up authentically, celebrating other women, being vulnerable, and also standing in my own strength without apology has added to this culture.
And then shining light on it in social media, like really calling to it. And I just want to add, not just in the pageantry world, because as I talked about on another podcast, you also had a girls club outside cheering you on, right? And I'll briefly tell you the story, because I don't know if you've heard this, but when we were in Vegas, there's a two-part of the competition. The first part of the competition, I came in jeans and a shirt and was not dressed up. But our sister friends, there was 4 other women, they were dressed to the hilt. And I have never both equally felt more like, oh my gosh, I missed the mark. I'm so out of place. And like it didn't matter. I remember them grabbing me and saying, let's on the step and go, let's get a picture. And I was literally like, one of us is not like the other. And we took the picture, and of course I stepped out and they took one of theirs. And later that night I had dressed up a little bit nicer, and we're sitting in the audience, and I look around at this beautiful ragamuffin, I would say. Like, we're not perfect women in any way, but like some of the most bold, brave, entrepreneurial, strong, smart women I've ever known, cheering you on. And then fast forward a little bit, recently we went and cheered one of those women on, as she is the executive director of Mothers Without Borders, and we're sitting at a beautiful table where they raised, I think, $320,000 in one night. And I looked at that same group of women, minus one of our friends who couldn't make it, and I just couldn't be more proud of the women that we are and have become, in all the different ways that we're different, and all the different ways that we're alike, and that we just choose to show up.
It's my favorite eclectic group of friends. And there's so much beauty in it, in that what binds us together is the choice to belong to each other and with each other.
I love that. Anything else you want to add to belonging, connection? Anything you feel in your heart that you didn't get to say?
Maybe the last thing is a little plug for, it's good for our health. And I don't know how much Andy, has shared on his podcast about this, but it impacts our health in ways that smoking, obesity, like other things that we think about do. And so if we're feeling sick, if we're feeling depressed, if we're feeling lethargic, and just all these things, there are obviously going to be a number of factors. But one thing that I really want to encourage people to look at is the positive social connection that they have in their life, and to prioritize it like your life depends on it, because it actually does. It impacts your lifespan, and not just your lifespan, the quality of the life within that span hugely.
Yeah.
So if you're going to invest in something in the new year, invest in your friendships, your close relationships,
capital,
your community. Invest, just make that a priority and a focus, sacrifice, give into that, and it will pay you back tenfold.
I love that. And that could be as simple as saying yes to an invitation
Mm-hmm.
or creating a space. I think sometimes it's overwhelming when we're feeling alone or when we're feeling like sort of disconnected, how to get up and into that. And I often think like it's not these big things. It's as simple as just saying yes to something. It's inviting someone to have a conversation with you. There are some things that are out of our control. This is something we definitely have the ability to like create or join. Thank you so much, Stacy,
Yeah.
for coming and sharing. And we will make sure that we put your platforms and things on there. I would love to everyone to follow Stacy in her journey, support the connection and belonging that she's putting out into the world. And thank you.
Thank you.